Of all the sins Padre Pio encountered in decades of hearing confessions, and he heard hundreds of thousands, he said the most frequently confessed category was not hatred, not dishonesty, not cruelty. It was sins against purity. That fact should stop us, because it means that the area most people consider too private, too personal, too modern to be a serious spiritual concern, is actually the area where the soul is most consistently wounded. And yet, it is the area where almost no one preaches clearly, where almost no one asks the direct question, where the silence has grown so thick that many people genuinely don't know what the Church actually teaches, or what Padre Pio actually said, or why any of it matters to the life they are living right now. Today, that silence ends. We are going to name 3 specific realities, not to produce shame, but to produce clarity, because you cannot heal what you refuse to look at. Write in the comments right now, Padre Pio, give me the courage to see clearly. That act of openness, small as it seems, is already the beginning of something. And stay until the end, because the third reality is the one that catches even the most devout off guard, the one that is almost never spoken about, and it may be the most important of all. Sin is not a popular topic. The word itself makes people uncomfortable, and in a world that has slowly replaced the concept of sin with the concept of personal choice, it becomes even harder to have an honest conversation about it. But Padre Pio never shied away from that conversation. Not once. He spent decades in a tiny confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo. Thousands of people traveled from across the world just to confess to him. Not because he was easy on them, but because they sensed he truly saw them. He saw what they were carrying. And he didn't look away. He wept. That detail matters. Those who witnessed him in the confessional described how he would weep for the people who came to him, not out of judgment, out of grief, because he understood what sin actually does to a soul, not theoretically, but in a deeply felt, deeply human way. He once said that the most confessed sins he encountered had to do with purity. Not violence, not cruelty, purity. Because this is one of the areas where human weakness is most consistent, most repeated, and most often minimized. And that minimization, that slow erosion of moral seriousness, is exactly what makes these sins so dangerous. Not because God is waiting to punish, but because the soul that grows numb to its own wounds eventually stops asking to be healed. Before we go further, it helps to understand something foundational. The body is not simply physical. St. Paul wrote it plainly. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Not a metaphor, a reality. Everything we do with the body, every habit we feed, every image we welcome, every act we consent to, these things leave marks on the soul. Some marks are light, others go deep. Padre Pio understood this. He saw it in confession year after year, and he spoke about it not to crush people, but to call them back to their own dignity. The first area is one that has become almost invisible in modern life, precisely because it is everywhere. It doesn't begin with an act, it begins with a thought, not with what the hands do, but with what the mind chooses to hold on to. Deliberate impurity of the imagination. We live in a generation saturated with images. The phone is always within reach, the screen is always available, and behind closed doors, with no one watching, the temptation arrives, subtle at first, then less subtle. A click, another click. And gradually, almost without noticing, a habit has formed, one that the person would struggle to name out loud, even to themselves. Padre Pio warned about this with remarkable directness. He said that sin almost always begins before the external act. It begins in what we choose to entertain, in the fantasy that is consciously cultivated, in the image that is deliberately sought, because the will is involved at every step. And where the will consents, responsibility follows. Jesus said it clearly, and it has never lost its edge. Whoever looks at another with disordered desire has already sinned in the heart. Notice, he did not say whoever feels tempted. Temptation is not the failure. Temptation is the knock at the door. What matters is whether you open it, and whether you invite it in to stay. Think about that distinction carefully. A thought arrives unbidden. That is not the moment of failure. The moment that matters is what comes next. Do you turn away? Do you reach for your rosary, change the room, redirect your attention? Or do you linger? Do you feed it? Do you open the app you know you shouldn't open? That choice, repeated over time, reshapes the soul from the inside. A woman once shared her experience with a spiritual director after years of struggling silently with this. She told herself for a long time that it was harmless, just a way to unwind, a way to cope with loneliness. But slowly, she noticed she was drifting. The rosary felt empty, Mass felt distant. She couldn't name why. Her spiritual director asked her gently, "What are you feeding your imagination before you sleep?" The question broke something open, because she knew the answer. She had simply been afraid to say it. That is how this wound works. It doesn't collapse the spiritual life in one dramatic moment. It drains it quietly, over months, over years. And because nothing visible has happened, because no one else was involved, it becomes easy to rationalize, easy to defer, easy to call it something smaller than it is. Padre Pio's counsel was stark. Flee the occasions of sin. Not negotiate with them, not test how close you can get without falling. Flee. Because holiness is not about how near the edge you can stand. It is about knowing your soul is worth more than the next few minutes of whatever the screen is offering. If this speaks to something real in your life, the path forward is practical and clear. Confession first and always. Concrete decisions afterward. Which applications need to be removed? Which times of day are most vulnerable? Which environments need to change? 3 Hail Marys before sleep, asking for purity of mind. Entrusting your imagination, consciously, deliberately, to Our Lady. These are not rituals without meaning. They are decisions. And they work. The second area is where sentimentality often stands in the way of honesty. Most people, when this topic arises, immediately say, "But we love each other." And that may be entirely true. The feeling is real. The intention is real. The connection is real. But love, however genuine, does not on its own consecrate what only a covenant can consecrate. The Church teaches, and Padre Pio lived and echoed this, that the intimate union of a man and a woman belongs within the sacrament of matrimony, not because the Church distrusts love, not because pleasure is suspect, but because true intimacy is not merely physical. It binds the soul. And souls need a foundation strong enough to hold what intimacy actually carries. When 2 people share that closeness before making a covenant before God, they are reaching for something sacred before the ground beneath them is solid. And the ground always matters more than the feeling, especially when harder seasons come, because they always do. Padre Pio was direct with engaged couples who came to him for counsel. He told them that purity before marriage was not a burden. It was a preparation. The couple who chose to wait, who built their relationship on prayer, on genuine conversation, on mutual respect rather than physical urgency, would enter the sacrament with something intact, something neither rushed nor borrowed, something that would sustain them long after the early intensity had settled into ordinary life. Now consider the opposite. When the body has been given before the covenant is made, the relationship becomes harder to read clearly. Emotional attachment deepens in ways that can blur discernment. When something eventually fractures, and in every relationship something eventually does, the wound is different, deeper, because more of the person was offered than the relationship had yet earned the right to hold. A young man once described sitting in adoration after the end of a relationship that had included this kind of intimacy. He said the grief was unlike anything he had expected. There was a dimension to it he couldn't explain, as though something had been shared that couldn't be retrieved. His spiritual director said simply, "Intimacy creates a bond. When the bond breaks without a sacrament to sustain it, the break goes all the way down." That is not severity for the sake of severity. That is honesty. And honesty, even when it costs something, is still a form of love. If you are in a relationship and this is touching something real, consider bringing it before God. Speak with a confessor. Have the conversation with the person you are with about choosing a different path from here. That conversation will be uncomfortable. But many couples have discovered that choosing purity, even partway through a relationship, opens something unexpected between them, a new quality of respect, a trust that feels different from anything that came before. Padre Pio would say simply, "If the love is real, it can wait. And waiting is not absence. Waiting is preparation." The third area is the one that surprises people most, because it concerns something that appears on the surface to be entirely permitted. Marriage. Not marriage as an institution, not whether you should get married or stay married, but what happens inside a marriage, in the most private part of it, when God has quietly been left outside the door. The Church teaches, and this is not a passing opinion but a settled conviction, that the conjugal act holds two dimensions that cannot be permanently severed without distorting its meaning. The first is union, the genuine self-giving of one spouse to the other in love and in vulnerability. The second is openness to life, the acknowledgement that this act participates in something beyond the two people themselves, something that God is present within. When sexuality within marriage becomes purely self-referential, when the door to life is deliberately and permanently closed, when the act becomes more transaction than gift, something in its integrity quietly disappears. Not because pleasure is wrong, but because pleasure without meaning is a diminishment. It takes the language of love and empties it of what it was trying to say. Padre Pio counseled married couples to approach this part of their life with prayer and with reverence. He spoke of each child as evidence of providence, not a weight to manage, but a sign that God had not looked away. He understood responsible parenthood. He did not demand recklessness, but he challenged couples to ask themselves honestly, is our marriage a space of mutual self-giving? Or has it slowly become a space of mutual use? That question is not accusation. It is an invitation. A couple married for many years described a conversation they had after sitting with this teaching for the first time. They realized they had never once prayed together about this dimension of their life. It had always been separate, practical, private, unexamined. The conversation that followed was, by their account, one of the most honest they had ever had. Not because everything changed overnight, but because they finally allowed God into a room they had kept closed without ever consciously deciding to close it. That is what Padre Pio called holiness. Not the holiness of great gestures and extraordinary experiences, the holiness of ordinary life, opened fully, every room, every corner, to the presence of God. Here is what becomes clear when you hold all three of these together: deliberate impurity of the imagination, intimacy outside the covenant of marriage, sexuality within marriage closed off from its full meaning. At first glance, they seem like separate issues, but they share the same root. Each one is a closing, a turning inward, a choice, often gradual, rarely dramatic, to take something sacred and reduce it to something smaller than it was made to be. And the consequence is almost never loud. It is quiet. The prayer life grows thin. The sacraments lose their weight. A heaviness settles in without a name. The soul is not broken in an obvious way. It is simply less free, less awake, less capable of the joy it was created for. Padre Pio wept in the confessional because he saw this. He saw people who were genuinely trying, genuinely faithful in many areas, who were being slowly drained by a wound they had never been helped to name. And his response was never condemnation. It was mercy, immediate, practical, and fierce. He used to say, "Pray, hope, and don't worry." That phrase is usually offered as comfort in external trials, but it lives here too. Pray for the grace of purity, not once, but daily. Hope that God's mercy is larger than your weakness, because it always is. And do not fall into despair, which is not humility. Despair is pride in reverse. It says, "My failure is bigger than God's love." It is not. It never has been. Take a moment right now, not later, right now, and ask yourself honestly, which of these three areas touches something real in my life? Where is there a door that has been left open? Where has there been a wound that I have been calling something else? You do not need to answer that out loud, but you do need to answer it before God. And when you do, go to confession. Not someday, soon. Go with the willingness to name what actually happened without softening it, without editing it into something more comfortable. The confessional is a hospital. The grace that flows through it is real, and a soul that arrives there with genuine sorrow leaves different from how it came in. 3 wounds, each one a closing, of the imagination, of the covenant, of the interior life of a marriage, each one healable. None of them beyond the reach of what happens in a confessional when a soul decides to stop editing itself before God. Padre Pio wept for souls. He wept because he loved them. He wept because he saw what these wounds were doing to people who were genuinely trying to live faithfully, but had never been told the truth plainly enough or gently enough to actually act on it. This is that truth. Spoken clearly, spoken gently, spoken because you are worth the honesty. If something in this video has stirred something real, if a question has surfaced that you know needs to be answered, write in the comments, "I choose purity," not as a performance, as a decision, as a moment of grace that you are choosing not to let pass. And if there is someone in your life, a friend, a son or daughter, someone you love, who you sense is quietly struggling in one of these areas, send them this video, not with a message that accuses, just, "I thought of you when I watched this." That small act might be the most important thing you do today. May Padre Pio intercede for every soul that has watched this. May he bring before God the prayers too fragile to say out loud, the wounds too deep to name, and the desire, however buried, however small, to come home. And may the words that Padre Pio carried in his heart every day remain with you now. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.